Ask the podcast coach for nice popping P to start off the day. Ask the podcast coach for October 16th, 2021.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music that means, hey, it's Saturday morning. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com, and joining me right over there is the one and only Jim Cullison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. Happy new mic Saturday. You had some popping peas going on a little bit earlier, but trying out a new mic today?
Yeah, I reached out to the folks at Shure, so I need to say that up front. And I said, hey, everybody's playing with this whole MVX and the MV7, which is kind of like a Shure SMB Lite in a way. So this is the MVX7. This is the one that's just an XLR. And the reason I'm playing with this is Bandrew over at podcastage.com, and Bandrew Scott had said that this one sounds a little better. The other one has a USB element in it. And I just for me, for this show, I just need an XLR.
Yeah, and XLR only, right? No USB on that one at all, which I'm better with anyways. I'd rather have XLR.
Yeah, and so the first thing I noticed is compared to now, my other one, of course, was the Electro Voice RE320, which I had a pop filter, he said, popping his P's again. I can see where I'm going to
be. Could you retrofit that one to go on the...
No.
Okay.
This would be one where I'd need...
That's the perfect size. That the smaller, rounder size, I think, is the perfect size for a pop filter.
Because the mic is too fat to squeeze it on there and that whole 9 yards.
Don't shame it, Dave. Don't shame that
mic. It's thick. It's thicker. Well, that's not any better either.
You should quit while you're ahead.
Yeah.
Speaking of quitting, I'm never going to quit coffee. Can we get a coffee pour going on here?
We can get a coffee pour. And, of course, that coffee pour is brought to you by the one and only, don't be fooled by cheap imitations, Mark over at podcastbranding.co. If you need any kind of image like a logo or new artwork, or heck, if you need a whole website, all you got to do is point your browser to podcastbranding.co. Mark is an award-winning graphic artist as well as a podcaster. And, of course, if you need a third bonus, he's Canadian, which means that's right. He's going to be polite. But I think a little later we're going to be talking about Jim had a kind of a quick consultation with Mark and learned some cool stuff. But I know every time I upload the School of Podcasting logo to anything, I smile because it just looks cool in my opinion, and I use it all the time. And if you think about it, they hear you before they see you. No, Dave, that's actually backwards. They see you before they hear you. And we should also say, I think I said this last week, but if not, Mark just celebrated 6 years doing his podcast, which is The Resourceful Designer. So when you're ready to look professional, there's only one place you got to go, and that is podcastbranding.co. So you actually had a little meeting with Mark, because I know you've been talking about you're going to update some stuff and redo your logo and things like that.
Yeah, you can go on his website, to send him a note. He said, hey, here's a link to my scheduling page. You can schedule a free 20-minute consultation with him. And I just sat down, and he was looking at my sites, and we went through some things. He's like, yeah, I like this. I like that. I could do a few things here, and I could help you out with this and help you out with that. And it got me kind of thinking about, I should do a whole bunch of... This is one of those moments on my podcast. You start thinking, well, if I'm going to change that, I should probably change this. And I got this thing to do. And I got some work to do. I'm going to book his branding. He has a branding package.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's social branding package. So I'm going to book that with him and start going through that process. I meant to do it during the week. I just didn't get to it. So yeah, Mark, thanks and he came on the other, I think last week or 2 weeks ago that he came on and joined us for most of the podcast.
Yeah. And I know everyone that listens to this show is going to go, but I also have to realize everybody that listens to this show doesn't listen to the School of Podcasting.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take that, because I had so much feedback from people that said, man, that was like the best show on graphics and design and things like that. And I was like, that's really good content. I'm like, I might repurpose that over at the School of Podcasting and make it more like a like an NPR kind of thing, and just cut out his answers and kind of weave a story through it and things like that. So
be a good way to repurpose it. I think you could add value to it, Dave. I think you could probably pull it apart and add value to it, and then the folks that listen to both shows, it would be great reminders. Speaking of listening to shows, Dan Lefebvre from Based on a True Story podcast, he joined me on Home Gadget Geeks on Thursday.
Nice.
And listen, I just had the most. He's a really good podcaster. Like,
yeah,
I just had the most fun with him, and he's kind of a geek, which was pretty great. So, if you're interested, I'll be publishing that a little bit later. HomeGadgetGeeks.com. But Dan came on. We thank Dan for his sponsorship of the mug. There's a couple episodes that he's done that have been tech related, so we're able to pull those in and talk about those. So super cool. So Dan, thanks for coming on the podcast, and thanks for sponsoring the mug.
And we got some comments here. The sure sounds different than the EV. Well, yeah, it has kind of a hollow sound, which is interesting because that's the adjective that Jim used. Now, right now, I'm running it completely blank. If I came in here and said, hey, turn on the processing, now I'm probably too bassy, or who knows.
Ooh, but not yet. No, not yet.
All right. That's the other thing I noticed.
It did add bass to it right away.
Yeah. The other thing I've noticed is and that's one of the reasons why I like the RE320, is there's definitely a little more of a proximity effect. Now, if you're like, what kind of word is that? Means if I get really close to it, I'm going to get bassy, a little bassier than usual. So, yeah. So I thought I'd play with it. You know, it's just the only thing I noticed, because I thought if I back away from it and talk about, I don't know, a fist away, and if I say, please bring pizza pronto, I'm not popping my piece. But as soon as I get close and say, please bring pizza there, I'm starting to hear them here. And I'm about 3 fingers away, maybe 4. So it's one of those things where you're going to either need a pop filter, or you know, maybe I'm just weird. Maybe I just talk too close to my mics. I always recommend like 3 fingers, and then do what I'm doing now, which is I'm pointing this thing at the corner of my mouth. So, but did I interrupt your story about Mark?
No, I think we got to the end.
Okay. Because the fun part was, in the end, he was kind of like, he almost said, I don't really need to do anything.
Yeah, it was a situation where he's like, actually, I like a lot of what you're doing, but here's just a few tweaks you could be doing to it. So if you're kind of thinking about, well, you're getting to the point where you want just some consultation on your brand, it doesn't have to be a whole big ordeal. Now, it might be, but it doesn't have to be such a huge big ordeal to get in there, and like you don't necessarily have to have all new stuff done for you. He may just do some tweaks. So great opportunity. But David, it got me thinking, I need to probably think through, like, what am I doing on Home Gadget Geeks? And are some things there, he had some recommendations on the way I do YouTube, and I was thinking, do I still want to kind of do the format the way I do it? Would I change things if I'm going to do some new artwork and some new logo work, tweak the logo, so to speak? Do I offer some new things? Is this time to change up some stuff? So I don't have any answers to that, but I have been thinking about it all week, kind of like, maybe I need to change some things.
Well, that's the fun part, because on one hand, if you keep doing the exact same thing over and over and over, there are times when you kind of like, time to make the donuts, And then on the other hand, if you tweak it too much, then your diehard listeners kind of, I know we've talked about him before, but Mike Rowe over at That's the Way I Heard It, or The Way I Heard It, or
the way I heard.
Yeah.
Oh, I used to listen to it all the time. This was pretty bad. I've stopped because of some of the changes he's making.
Yeah. And I knew we were in trouble, because you are the person that turned me on to the show, and I loved it because it was short, and Mike was my shower show. I would start it, get in the shower. When Mark was over, I don't care how good it felt, it was time to get out of the shower. And I heard him say, I've been listening to Joe Rogan, and I really like the fact that he can go so long, and it's a long form. And I thought, oh, no, back away from the Rogan. And sure enough, he started doing
Rogaine, but Rogan.
Yeah. And he changed his. I mean, his tagline used to be something for the person with the short attention span. And I was like, and if you have a short attention span, guess what?
Curious mind, short attention span.
Yeah. And I was like, guess what? If you got a short attention span, you're not listening to Mike Rowe anymore. I know. I took him out of. I had a playlist called Short Shows, and I would listen to those when I walked around the block, or if I was in the shower or something like that. And I had to take him out of the short shows, and it turns out he's not in any other playlist. He's probably still getting downloads, but I'm, every now and then I'll like, and I'll see where it's like an hour and 20 minutes. And I was like, and
yeah. Well, that's the danger of changing your format that radically. Like,
right.
If it were me, I would have kept the short form and then made a new channel for the long form. Like, I'm going to do this long form thing. It'll be in a new channel and just to see, because that's a good way to kind of test it, to say, like, are people really wanting to do this? They'll go out and get it if they, you just tell them in the short form, hey, we have a new long form. If you want to hear from me and my producer or whatever it was, there's a buddy, whatever it was. But man, one day when I just went to the feed and it was now an hour, I was like, I can't catch up to you.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I used to listen to 3 or 4 of his in a row type deal. And I could do now. I mean, that's 4 hours. So again, 4 hours isn't wrong. It was just not my expectation.
Yeah.
And if I came to it now and I was like, oh, okay, well, if it's going to be an hour, I probably need to change the way I listen to it. Pandemic's wiped out all those long shows for me, so I'm not listening to them. But yeah, it could have. I think he could have done it better from that perspective. Like, he could have done it differently. And I know ultimately his numbers will tell. He's a numbers guy. He watches them all, so the numbers will tell. If he gets a huge drop, he may change.
May come back, and that's a matter where maybe it was a case where he was tired of doing the short show for the curious mind with the short attention
span.
Still
does it? It's in the long.
It's show. In the beginning, and his whole thing is, well, you can listen to the short show and then skip. And I was like, how about? And I think
that's true.
Maybe having 2 different versions of the same show then, because I don't really care. Like, a lot of times he was giving the behind the scenes of the story, and I was like, I don't care about, like, I just want the sausage. I don't really care how it was made. So
well, there's a lot. So there's no right answer there. You could keep the show the same, create a separate channel. You could keep the original or change the original show and create another channel just to kind of see how people move, see how people move. Or just keep it all in the same, I guess. And I don't know. This is where there's no right answers. You got to kind of do what you want to do, right?
Yeah. And then see what happens.
The numbers will fall. And by the way, you're going to get differences of opinion. I mean, that just happened in our chat room just like 2 minutes ago. Stefan says, "Hey, I love it. You guys should have guests on once a month." And the pest control nut said, "I don't actually like it when there's guests because they're nervous and they,
Well, here's the funny thing about that is I get people that email me all the time saying, I'd like to be a guest on Ask the Podcast Coach. And I go, it's 90 minutes of free form, whatever you want to do.
Just come on in.
You got a question or a story about your podcast? Just get up at 10:30. So yeah.
And I think we even tell them how to do it. It's streaming right there.
Yeah.
AskThePodcastCoach.com/join.
Join.
If you want to be a guest, you can. Well, but here's the deal, Dave. I don't think a lot of folks necessarily think that are in the chat room think they have enough to say to be a guest or whatever. They kind of need that invite and maybe some time to prepare and some of those other kinds of things. So it's okay. Like, you can call in if you want, or you can just listen. That's fine. We don't care. We're fine with it either way.
Yeah. But it's funny, talking about tweaking formats, Todd and Rob, who do the new media show, have said that when they have guests, their numbers kind of trickle down a little bit because people tune in to hear Todd and Rob talk about podcast news and all that stuff. So you said, we were talking before we started, that you went back and listened to some of our old shows.
I did. I did. Last night I was setting things up for this morning. So I went to YouTube to see if you had posted anything yet. And then I got a little, hey, 2018, an Ask the Podcast Coach from 2018. So I went back and watched it. And then I went down the rabbit hole. I went to 2017, 2016, 2015. And I started watching, you can, when you do that and you start seeing the evolution of yourself, right? Which is really crazy. One, my hair was a lot darker back then. Beard was a lot darker as well. Yeah. I didn't have a beard in some of the older ones. But from a content perspective, you begin to see our evolution in this and how we evolve from it's just different. we're more comfortable with each other. The content style is different. We were on Google Hangouts in 2015, 2016. So you couldn't see me do the dance in the beginning of and I remember when we switched to StreamYard and you're like, now people can see Jim dancing now, right? Kind of deal. And I've done that the whole time, like the whole time we've done it.
Right.
So it's just a great opportunity, Dave, to go back. One, to see how far we've grown in this format. And then two, how we've evolved in even our backgrounds. Like I've been in the same spot since the very beginning. It hasn't changed. Shelving is the same. The dresser down here is the same. But I'm constantly changing. And I could see like during the pandemic when I cleaned it up. Because I was podcasting for work from home. I was like, I had boxes everywhere and all kinds of stuff all over the place. So just good memories too of where we were at that time doing those kinds of things. So I think it's a good exercise to do. I don't know, every year maybe go back and listen to some old ones and just see where you've come.
Yeah, and what's the other thing I always find that's weird, because I typically record my show Sunday afternoon around 3, and I don't mess with stuff. It's almost, for the past couple of years, it's been an RE320 into a Roadcaster, and yet the tone will be different. I always like, how is that? And not that it's bad. It's just like, wow, that's weird. That sounds a little more bassy, or that sounds this or that. So it's always kind of interesting. But I love the fact, because at that point, in theory, you can listen with a set of fresh ears. And so when you're sitting there going, ooh, if it's an interview show, I hope I ask them about this when they get done with this answer. And then you can kind of see if you did, and that whole 9 yards. So yeah, I think if you think about it, golfers, any kind of sports people, comedians, all these people go back and watch to critique their performance, because there's might be something you're missing, and you can't really do that with a show you just released, because you're way too close to the forest to see the trees.
Yeah.
But when it's 6 months, a year later, you're like, I don't even remember recording this. I talked about this.
No. Although what's weird for me is I listen to the intro. If I can listen to 5 minutes of the intro, I can almost tell you where the show went. Now I couldn't tell you, like if you said, hey, we did this show on October 18th, 2015. Even if you mentioned we had a guest, I may not remember it. But when I hear the audio or see the audio, it all starts flowing. It all starts flooding back. You're like, oh yeah, I remember that. Okay. Yeah, we did this and we talked about that and this kind of thing. So it flows back. When people ask me, hey, do you remember what you said? I'm like, do you have any audio? Can you point me to the audio? Because I need to actually hear a little bit of it for some of those memories to come back.
Yeah. Chris Nessie says, a problem with a call-in show is when somebody calls in, they basically become a guest. So, and that's the tricky part of a live show. The thing I had to get comfortable with was, and it's usually pretty obvious, if somebody comes on and you're like, this is not a good fit, or in some cases, and you'll hear this on talk radio, well, they'll be like, well, I just think Brady is the GOAT, man. He's the best of all time. And you're like, okay, Steve from Rochester. He's like, he is, man. He's the best. And you're like, like greatest of, and you're like, okay. So we realize that Steve has said all he's come on to say.
Right.
And he doesn't want to get off the phone. And that's where you got to go, all right, next up, we have Joan from Poughkeepsie, and you just got to move Steve off, because he had his time. He did his thing, but he doesn't want, he turns into, I'm going to date myself. Google this one. It's fun. John Belushi. So that was like 70 something, had a great skit. It was called The Thing That Wouldn't Leave. And it's like these poor guests. And he's like, you guys got any Fritos? And he's like,
well, talk radio they're brutal. I mean, when you're done, you're done. Well, thanks for calling in. And there is no, you're not jumping. They've, you're gone, and they have removed you. I think a good host can kind of figure out when the conversation's reached its terminal velocity, and then say, well, hey, I appreciate you calling in, and not saying, well, anything else? Like, right, because you're just gonna the guest will make something up.
Yeah.
Because they feel like, or they'll do this. This is really common too. I hear this all the time. Anything else? No, but, and then they say something else. I've done this. I've heard this on my own podcast and on Call the Coach and the stuff we do at Gallup. If you want to close the conversation, just close it, right? Just go, well, hey, appreciate you coming in. Thanks for doing this. Have a great afternoon. Let them go. You know, you got to do that.
And if there was really something that they wanted to say, they will call back. You know,
they can.
They can. I don't know that I've
Yeah.
ever heard that or seen that, but aside from the
Well, I think you're afraid that someone's going to feel like they got pushed off, and
Right.
they did. Like,
yeah,
so, you know, that's the danger as a guest may get sensitive and be like, well, gosh, that was fast.
you ready for
you know?
the best phrase I heard this week? I was
Yeah,
talking to
yeah,
a friend of mine, and we're talking about trying to work with churches, and he said, "Just remember this." And I go, "What?" He goes, "Being offended is a choice." And I was like, "Oh, that is good." It's like I
Yeah.
like that. So, well, I see we got another question in here. This is always a good one. This is from our buddy Reverend Ken Blanchard. He says, "What are the three? This is the top. This is the problem with this question. We have to pick the top 3 for starting a new show. Stuff you know now."
I think based on what we know now about starting a new show,
Yeah.
I think the number one thing is you have to be interested in it. Like, and you have to be interested in it for a while. This can't be the latest craze. You know, Dave, you got interested in crypto a month or two ago, and I was a little like, Dave, is this something you're going to stick with for a while? Because are you really interested in crypto, or
it's going to be
not, it'll fade pretty fast.
Yeah, it's probably going to be a once a month show. I've come to that conclusion. That's because when you try to do a round table with a lot of people, this is one of those things like we just talked about. There are times when you have to be okay, kind of saying, okay, we're done with this guest and we're going to move them off and bring on another guest. And that is awkward. You have to realize that you're not going to be able to pick a date and time that everyone can show up.
Yeah.
And you just got to go, well, I know that so-and-so can't make it, but it's, Thursday at this time. And that's the way it is. I think for me, the questions I always ask every single person when they start off is, number one, why are you doing this? And if they go, I want to make money quickly, I go, okay, great. Do you have an email list? No. Do you have a large social following? No. Great. Do you have a product of any sort? No. Okay, then you're not going to make money fast. I'm like, that's just straight up. So why am I doing this? Figure out who is it for, and then I guess what do you want them to do? So I always go back. I finally rephrased this. I used to say, how will you know if your show is a success or not? And they go, if I could just help one person, that would be great. And then like 2 months later, they're like, I'm not making any money at this.
Right.
So I now ask them, is this a hobby, which is fine, or a business? And if it's a business, again, how are we going to make money with this? And so many people think, well, I'm going to start a podcast in about 3 months, I'll get sponsors. And I'm like, if you go listen to the feed, if you're looking for like legit sponsor money, less than 10% of podcasters, at least on Libsyn, get enough downloads to get the typical Casper mattress. And for the record, if you look at that, AdvertiseCast, which is owned by Libsyn, has now been publishing the average CPM, and it's usually around $25. So if you had, 5,000 downloads at $25 CPM, I think it comes out to like $500 an episode. Okay, so that's great. Now, if you have more than one spot, that's $1,000 an episode. But if you do a weekly show, throw in Uncle Sam, there comes a point where you go, yeah, you're going to need another stream of income there. So I think that's it. So why am I doing this? That's key. Because if you don't know the why, and then who's it for? And then what other tip?
I do your point about success, knowing like what are my success metrics? I think that's super important. How do I know I'm doing the right thing? So that's a way to measure it, right? Whether that's in downloads or influence, or I want access to people, I want to meet people, that kind of thing. I think it'd be good to have some success metrics.
And I think for me, it's my favorite bumper sticker that I kind of came up with. Spend $100 on a microphone, spend 100 hours figuring out what your audience wants.
Yeah.
And realize that you're not always going to know what your audience wants, but there are ways you can in the School of Podcasting, I have a couple tutorials on this where you can go into Amazon and look for 4- and 2-star reviews. 4 because it was good, but not enough to get a 5. And people will typically say, I would have given it a 5, but they didn't talk about this. You're like, okay, people want to know about this. And likewise, it'd be like, I would have given it a 1 because it was pretty bad, but they did mention this. So I gave it a 2. And so you can get feedback. And then, of course, we make jokes about this, but it's not a joke. If you go to YouTube, there are lots of comments.
Oh,
and you can see what people like. Why did this video suck? Oh, this guy's, so you can see what the trolls are up to. And sometimes the trolls make a point. So that'll give you insights. And because that really is what kind of gets, when somebody goes, wow, this show was made for me. I can't get this place any place. I was talking with a guy yesterday on my chat. He stopped by the School of Podcasting. And by the way, if you ever see the chat thing on, if that's on, that means I'm sitting there. And he's got access. He's working with a guy that started filming Guns N' Roses when they were kids. Like he has pictures of Slash without his hat. I mean, that's old. And I think it's called the First 50 Concerts, and they filmed them all. So he's got, I said, dude, you have one of the key ingredients, and that is you have information that you cannot get anyplace else. I go, and I said, right now, Guns N' Roses is kind of working on new material. I said, but we all love Appetite for Destruction. And I said, so he's setting it up, and he's going to have bonus content with Patreon and things like that. But that's another key ingredient when you have information that you can't get anyplace else. I'll give you an example of a good podcast and a bad podcast, because I'm doing a bad one right now, just for the fun of it.
Like we're doing a bad podcast?
No. I do a show, and it's on, and the only reason I do it is it's on Buzzsprout. And feel free to not listen to this; it's not good. But I want to play with Buzzsprout, and it's called Podcasting Resources, and I have a website, podcastingresources.com. This is podcastingresources.net. And all I do is I go out to podcastingresources.com. I pick one of the resources I found, and I go, hey, here's a website that connects podcasters with guests. And according to their website, they do this, blah, blah, yada, yada, yada. The website is there. And, for more information, check the show notes. So I'm basically doing a web search for you. That's in my opinion, that's a bad podcast. It's not horrible. Is it valuable? It saved you 3 minutes of doing a Google search. A good podcast would be, hey, today I look at 5 podcasting guest things. There's podcast guests, there's this one, there's that one. Then I look at them, and I'm going to tell you which one I like best and why. Now what am I doing? I'm saving you a lot of time. I'm giving you insights, and I'm doing some of the work. And that's information, not that you can't get it any place else, but it's information that took some time and some thought. And if I throw in my opinion, that's even more fun. So not that the other one's a bad podcast, but to me, when you start doing some theory, and I forget what episode, I did an episode on this about the different levels of what makes a good podcast. And when you kind of, start doing comparisons and things like that. So,
well, and I just think the good and bad is in the eye of the beholder. So,
that's true. It's a good point.
Maybe
not the best words.
Well, no, it's hard. We're trying to quantify, this is a multi-dimensional problem, and we're trying to solve it with a single dimension of good or bad, which is, I don't know if you can do it. You have to kind of think through, like, who are my listeners? We've just in the chat room in the last 15 minutes, there's been a big discussion about, was that episode where we had Mark on for the whole guest helpful? And some liked it and some didn't, right? And
right,
you're so as podcasters, Dave, if we were trying to do some collective intelligence out of the chat room to say, should we do that again? It'd be inconclusive. Like, we wouldn't like, some people like it, some people don't. What is it? Did it work? Did it not work? Listen, I thought it was good. It's what the universe gave us that morning. That's what we had. I thought Mark was fabulous. Take from it what you want, but at the same time, we can't, if we start thinking like we've got to listen to every single bit of feedback, or listen is the wrong word, take action on every single bit of feedback, man, we would be a flailing podcast, not really helping anybody. I think in that maybe on that list of 3 things, the 4th thing I would add to that then is be yourself. Like, do what you want to do, right? Do that piece and have it and do it in a way that that works for you. And you've just got to you just got to get there You just got to be true to it. Because if you're faking it, listen, Rogan's super popular. I hate his podcast. Like, I will never listen to Joe Rogan ever. I just not interested in it, not interested in that style. I don't have the time. So but that's my personal opinion. So anyways, I think that to kind of round that out, Dave, I think those are some things as a podcaster that you want to definitely think through.
And Shannon is on deck. And so Shannon, if you can just hang for a quick second, because I look up, I was like, holy cow, we've already gone
Clubhouse, or is she in here in?
No, she's
StreamYard?
here in the in StreamYard.
Okay, Shannon, hang tight for a second. Let us get through don't go anywhere. We want to
don't go anywhere. And so I looked up, I was like, well, it's time to think. Well, first of all, that means Jim's probably thirsty. And the other thing, the thing we're going to find out here is, I want to share my screen. Yes. Okay, good. Because I was like, holy cow. I did a thing where I deleted all my cookies and history and things like that. That sometimes can kind of mess you up because you find out that you had plugins and stuff that need that information. But we always like to thank the teacher's pet. That, of course, is James over at the Dog Podcast Network. If you have a little pooch or a hound or a whatever, if you got a dog that fits in your purse or your backpack, or 110 pound German Shepherd that barely fit in your Toyota Prius, which was fun. Then you got to go over to Dog Podcast Network. They have short shows, they have long shows, they have tall shows, thin shows. If it's about a dog, it's over there at Dog Podcast Network. And then we always thank our $20 supporters. Oops, I skipped one. Baby Mountain Radio Productions. It's where podcasting and hard work are made fun. That's my buddy Michael Delaney and Shane over at tourpreneur.com. If you operate a tour business or plan on starting one, this podcast is for you. Glenn the Geek Hebert over at horseradionetwork.com. Glenn also is going to be the opening keynote at Podfest in a couple weeks. Podfest Origins. And then the Indie Drop-In Network at indiedropin.com. If you got a true crime or a scary story or a comedy show, they've got a built-in audience over there that is looking for that stuff. So hand them over a couple episodes and grow your audience. Ed Sullivan, if you're looking for an editor to make you sound like butter, it's like butter for your ears, go over to soniccupcake.com and he will put more icing on your show. Felix over at the Latin Podcast Awards, which is dedicated to enhancing the visibility of the Latinx podcasts around the world. They've been doing it since 2017. You can find them at latinpodcastawards.com. Max Trescott up in the air doing aviation news talk. You can find him at aviationnewstalk.com. KJST Media is an LGBTQ plus founded company focused on helping all levels of podcasters to grow their podcast, regardless of what you're looking for. Caden is there to help you. Find it out at kjstmedia.com. Greg over at debtshepherd.com, where he is teaching financial wellness. So if you need some help with those finances, check him out at debtshepherd.com. Kim Craggy at Toastmasters101.net. If you'd like to develop your voice, reduce your editing time, or improve your content, Toastmasters101.net. And if you'd like to be an awesome supporter, simply go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. And we'd love to help you. And if you want to, if you're like, I don't really want to do the monthly thing, you can go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/store and pick up things like my book or do a one-time donation, all those fun things. And thanks to everyone who helps support the show. So with that, let's bring up Shannon. Shannon, and this is one thing we always like to point out. You don't have to turn on your camera. If you want to come on and you don't want to turn on your camera, you don't have to. So Shannon, how are you?
Hi. I'm sorry I'm using computer audio. Half of my stuff is all packed up and in between here in my fifth wheel trailer. So you get what you get with me.
No judgment.
Yeah.
And you are absolutely fine.
Yeah, we should also say Haley, we will bringing Haley up in Clubhouse in just a bit. But right now we're talking with Shannon, and don't worry about your audio. What can we help you with?
Okay, so I released very first episode like about 24 hours ago. So I don't know. It was like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning when I finally got done and said it's good enough, and I put it out. And so I've got like 2 or 3 questions. Sure. This is so cool. I woke up this morning and I checked Libsyn, and I have like almost 250 downloads.
Nice.
Which I was not expecting. There's people I've got them in Australia and Brazil and here and Canada and Belgium. I didn't know there's barrel racers in Belgium. This is
You
so
never
going to
know.
be so addicting.
You never know. Just know that of those 250, you may only hear from 2 of them. Like,
Sure.
yeah.
Okay. So a question that I have is, how do you add like different album covers? So like when you go into Podpage, it just looks like the same old thing over and over and over and over again. I can see if I had like 100 episodes, I think it would make the page look better and help people find things better. If, okay, so this episode I did Woodbury Performance Horses, and I'd like to have, a logo from them as their album cover for that episode. And I see that Dave has done that in Podcast Rodeo Show, and I'm just wondering how you do that.
Yeah, since you're using Libsyn, I pulled up Libsyn on the screen. And when you are making an episode, now I'm in Libsyn 4, this is the same in Libsyn 5, you have a tab called Artwork, or if you're in Libsyn 5, there's just an artwork box on the right-hand side. And when you upload an artwork, and that artwork needs to still meet Apple specs, so it needs to be at least 1400 by 1400, all the way up to 3000 by 3000, and the file size is so important, needs to be less than 500 kilobytes. And you just add that to that. Now, here's the fun thing is not every app will show these. Like Amazon looks beautiful. Spotify looks great. There are a few others. Apple's website will show it, but the Apple podcast app will not. Why? Because it's Apple, and they like to do things that are confusing. So that you just upload it on the episode, and then Podpage, when it syncs your episode, will bring that on over.
Okay, so it's just in there on the episode.
Yep.
Okay.
And if I've seen people that will upload the artwork that's the exact same artwork that's under their show. So you have show artwork and you have episode artwork. And if your episode artwork is the same artwork as your show, don't bother, because almost every system will just use the show artwork. But if you're going to upload something different, you do that on the episode side.
And just to represent well, all the other podcast providers do have a similar function, right?
Yeah.
You can go in there and by episode upload album art to meet for each individual episode.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if you're using Captivate, they all have a spot for artwork.
Not 100%, but most of them, 99% of them, have a spot to put the artwork in by episode. Is what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Shannon, it can be, I mean, it's kind of, make sure if you're going to do episode artwork, it's a solid, I look at this and know that one, it is a part of the podcast. So like you wouldn't want the branding to be so different that people wouldn't recognize it. I mean, they should be able to look at it and say, oh, that's also a part of this podcast. And then that what you're using in the art from a distance is recognizable. Like you wouldn't want to jam a whole bunch of words in there. So
what I would like to do is, I don't know, Dave, if you've seen like my artwork, but it's, the business of barrel racing, and then it sort of frames a picture, but I want to keep like the frame the same and try to just change that background picture to be either, and it could just be words too, like the guest name or something, just to differentiate it.
So the frame is your brand, right? Is you're trying to keep that similar, and that's the same thing as your podcast artwork. And then you're including something new inside the frame. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. It's got a shot. It's never perfect, right? But it's a good thought. Test it a little bit and see what kind of feedback you get on it.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the feed from Libsyn. They have almost like a template where let me share my screen.
While you're bringing that up, Dave, that was some advice that Mark gave me too when I talked to him this week. It's like even for my YouTube logo or YouTube thumbnail, to keep the elements similar so they know where they're at, but then I could put individualized either faces or words in there. Go ahead, Dave. You got
this was the cool thing that Mark did for me is, if you're doing something that probably should be changed, he will very politely and lovingly and very, he's a Canadian again, he's going to be polite, said, Dave, he goes, you want your artwork to kind of, he goes, sometimes these are so small on different apps.
Right.
And he goes, I want to be able to know that's your show. And so what the feed does is they have pictures of Elsie and Rob, that's the hosts. It's typically greenish to match the whole color thing, but they have a big number on it, and then the name of the episode, and then behind the scenes they have pictures of the hosts and things like that. So you kind of it's a similar look, and it's the same, basically 2 pictures of them. And so that's just, they have kind of like this little template thing, and I was like, I need to do that. Because it's simple, and that way you do that. And
does that make sense, Shannon?
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Good.
Oh, it's Heather.
There we go. I'm going to say, this is your site, right? I got the right. No? Okay. What's your website?
I am thebusinessofbarrelracing.com.
Oh, there we go.
Shannon, what else? What are the questions? You said you had a couple.
Okay, so another question I had was I ended up with 2 versions of the podcast in Spotify. So what was happening was, it was the middle of the night when I was working on things earlier last week, and the link to do things for Spotify within Libsyn wasn't working for, it turns out, about half an hour. Like, it would just give you an error, and it was nothing. It said something about Libsyn can't do anything about this. I don't remember exactly what it was. So I went actually to Spotify and created, a Spotify account, and I'm like, okay, now I'm done. Forgot that I did that, in the 2 a.m. fog, and then did it again on Libsyn. So can I just go to one of them and delete it without messing life up?
Yeah, you can either go to Spotify or you can go to Libsyn. Both have tools to go in and say, okay, take these 2 and kind of, basically make it so that you end up with one. But so
what's the best way to do that, do you think? Can I just go to Spotify and delete my account and everything because Libsyn is already pushing it there?
No, I mean, you can delete one of the versions, because chances are you're pushing the same thing. You're using your Libsyn. You want to use the Libsyn Spotify feed. That way you'll get stats about Spotify. So you would want to delete, if you ever put one in that's like your website, the Business of Barrel Racing /RSS or whatever it is, and then you have one that's /Spotify, you want to get rid of the one in Spotify that's just good old fashioned /RSS. You want to keep the Spotify feed in Spotify. So, but if you email Libsyn, we can do that. We basically have a tool. It's really cool. Spotify gave us a tool where we can go in and kind of affect things, because this happens all the time, especially for Anchor people. Because Anchor people will have Anchor will submit them to Spotify. They'll come over to Libsyn and they'll set up their Spotify destination and it'll submit it again. And so they just got tired of us going, can you delete the duplicate? So,
Shannon, which isn't as important as how fast you do this. So, because you've got people subscribing right now. So, you're going to possibility you're going to break that for some, if you remove one or the other, you're going to break one of those.
Yeah,
so,
well, and they're both coming from Libsyn. Like it's all Libsyn /Spotify.
But if I was on Spotify and I subscribe to the one you remove, it's going to break it. Now, chances are they'll go find it again. They'll find the other instance of it and subscribe to it.
It's all the same RSS feed.
Yeah, but in Spotify, it's 2 different IDs. So Spotify's got you twice.
Yeah, it's going to depend on what happens in Spotify when they click on that.
Yeah,
like behind the scenes, if they're directly connected to the RSS feed, or if there's some sort of
just don't worry about it. Just move quickly to get it done.
Yeah,
I'll do it right away.
Yeah.
So.
Figure out which one you want removed and then remove it.
Okay.
Cool.
Yep, I'll figure that one out. Any tips as far as phone number? Like, Dave, do you have or Jim, do you have a phone forwarding service? So I have a Facebook site that's getting a lot of traffic all of a sudden for the podcast. For contact info, do people actually call this? The Western industry is pretty tight, and people aren't afraid to just pick up the phone and call you. So it would be nice in some ways. On the other hand, do I really want to put my phone number on a Facebook page?
Not your cell phone number.
No. You can you can get a Google Voice number. You can go to podcastvoicemail.com, which is my Call 8 affiliate link. And people will call in. In fact, later today, somebody sent in a email to us that we'll be talking about. But I would not put a phone. I have for a while. I think right now I have my Google Voice number on the School of Podcasting site. And I've only once had some poor guy in Germany call me at 4 a.m. So you just learn to I think I
shut all those stuff off too. You can get a Google Voice number, but where you don't get notified.
Just make it voicemail.
Yeah. Okay. You just check it on a regular basis. But that kind of depends on your audience. Some audiences will call. Other audiences will not.
Yeah.
And so if your audience if they want to do it that way, you should provide a number for them to do it. If in the future you stop getting calls, stop using the phone number as an option, because obviously it's not, that's not what your audience wants. But
Sure.
I think it's worth throwing out there for now, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, I won't hog any more of your time, but thank you.
Great having you.
I'll probably be back regularly now that things are kind of rolling, because I'm gonna break.
Cool.
I'm gonna break everything.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the world of staying up till 3 a.m. to get your
Nice.
Great, Shannon. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
thank you.
You bet. Call anytime.
And in Clubhouse, the one and only Haley Radke. Let me turn up the phone so we can hear. How are you, Haley?
Good morning. I'm well. I'm laughing because I didn't really have a question, but I was the only one in the Clubhouse room, so here I am.
Oh, okay. Oh, I just
let's use it as a chance for you to promote your podcast, and then we'll let you go. But what do you podcast about?
I'm adopted, and I talk to other folks who are adopted as well, and we talk about search and reunion and the hard things that come along with that. It's called Adoptees On, and I guess my question would be, I'm coming up on 200 episodes. So what did you guys do when you hit milestones on your show?
This is a great question. I have done a couple things. Usually I break format, which is kind of weird if you think about it. And I will do something wacky. I peaked at episode 400, and I did I made up a fake radio duo called Binky and the Wiz. And ever since then, I cannot top Binky and the Wiz. And I'm at 789, something like that, for the School of Podcasting. And so I'm coming up on 800, and I'm just out of ideas. I've seen people do things like Ask Me Anything. I tried that one year, and it was okay. I thought people would ask more like personal questions or whatever, and they were still asking me like, what's the best microphone under $100? And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, we can talk about that too. I think maybe something live. I've seen people do that. Jim, have you seen any people do?
All different kinds. What is your what's your current format? Like, how long? What do you do? Is it interview? Is it solo? What's your podcast like today?
It's interviews. I'm usually around an hour, and I actually didn't Ask Me Anything to kind of like start back in the fall, and I found the same sort of thing, Dave. So it was kind of more a mix of questions. But
what's gotten the best down? Like what episode that you've done has gotten the best downloads, and why?
That's a great question. My top downloaded episode is episode 1.
Oh,
because
it makes
I feel
sense.
like people go back to
it's been out there the longest. It has been. So that doesn't necessarily help you. I would think this is just my advice. Find the thing that's been the most popular and do it for that milestone, or just do another episode. Your listeners really don't. I have a story where we on 100th episode we did a whole congratulatory thing, and the host, congratulations. This was back in the day when 100 was a big deal, and the comment we got from somebody in the chat room was, that's an hour of my life I'll never get back, and stop with all the congratulatory backslapping. And you kind of go, well, that's kind of true. Like, in some ways, do you celebrate? Well, your listeners are there for content. So I think I would bring them back for some of the best content to still celebrate it, recognize it in the beginning. Hey, this is 200, blah, 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 blah. Then get to some really great content.
Yeah, Fred in the chat room has said Dave in 2007 and 2009 did a kind of remembrance show where I played clips from, back in the day.
Yeah.
But that got to be so long. When you get to so many episodes, you're like, I'm just going to play a little clip. And all of a sudden you're like, your intro is 5 minutes long, and it's just nothing but, stuff that, people now don't really care that, you started with a different mic or, whatever. It's just,
Haley, do you feel like you know your audience pretty well?
Oh, yes. And you know what? When you just said like acknowledge, but the celebration is more for me, right? So I love that. Serve them. Just go back to serving them.
Yeah, and get some really great content in there.
Did you ever do anything live?
No.
Okay. I think I know why. All right, I can tell by that answer. Because some people in the chat room were saying she should do something on StreamYard and do it live. There is something, and I know Haley, you know that I know that you know that I know that you know that you're just a person, and you probably put your shoes on one at a time this morning. But when your audience gets a chance to see you live, and they're like, "Oh wow, there she is! Wow, look at it. Her voice is actually coming out of her mouth. Like, wow, that's cool."
Yeah.
You might do something live just to say, "Hey, I just wanted to come on and, say thanks and blah blah." I don't know. That's an option, and then you can always do that. And then if you go, "Wow, that was a complete that didn't work," don't release it as an episode.
Or do both.
Yeah.
Like, do a 200th episode and follow it up with a premiere where you're live. Or, I mean, there's a lot of different combinations of things you could try there. And don't make the live something that is high stakes for you. Like, make it low stakes. Almost just make it like a Zoom call,
Mm-hmm.
and where it's low stakes, but your audience gets a chance to interact with you. That may be a big, or they get to come in and answer a question about adoption, or something inspirational. Make it inspirational about adoption. We certainly need more people who are willing to do that. So something like that. Does that help?
All right. Thank you so much. I love the brainstorm.
You're
thanks
welcome.
Thanks for being an audience of one out there on Clubhouse. Appreciate that.
We're actually up to, I think, 3 now, something like that.
Well, all right, Clubhouse.
So
way to represent.
We're rocking and rolling.
Hey, Haley, thanks for calling in. Appreciate it.
But yeah, I remember when I first met Haley and I was talking to her, and she was explaining how, and I talk about her podcast a lot when I get into talking about niches, because the only people that know what it's like to be adopted are people that are adopted.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't. That's it. Can't say, "Oh yeah, I empathize," unless you have been.
I know it's like, no, you don't. So, yeah, it's like, oh, I do.
Yeah, actually, you don't.
I had a dog, and it was like, no, sorry, yeah. But yeah, so let's see what else. Speaking of getting feedback, I think can we do this?
Save that.
Can we post show?
For post show, I kind of got. Well, let me set it up. So I said last week. I came in halfway through the show and I was a little cranked up on food. I had gone out for breakfast, had a really rich breakfast and a lot of coffee, and I came in and I got a little aggressive. And so I think in the post show, I got some pretty true, pretty honest, but pretty blunt feedback on it. So I think, Dave, let's push that to the post show, because I want to talk a little bit extended about it. And if you're just a regular podcast subscriber for us, you listen to us through the podcast feed, maybe now's a good time to join the Patreon group and get over there if you want to hear the blasting that I took. I was out of control last week. I'm just going to admit that. I got done with the show and I was like, I don't think that was my best work. So
I was going back through the chat room to make sure we didn't miss anything. The Records and Bands podcast says he's starting to turn each episode webpage into a complimentary blog post for podcast 2, but it's very time dependent. The different art looks better though. Yeah, that is my advice for everybody. If somebody goes like, "What's a podcast?" I go, you do the whole it's internet radio thing, but really to the person who has a website, it's a blog post with a player. And so I have, I get to see a lot of people, and it's always interesting when I see somebody go, "I'm just not getting as many downloads as I thought." And I will go over, there was one I saw, it was like a sermon, kind of Christian podcast. And they were like, this week's episode has features a reading of like Timothy 3 verse 16. And I was like, that's not like, yes, that explains what it is, but like, what's in it for them? Give them an idea of why you're talking about it or whatever. So you need, I think Google needs at least 300 words. I've heard other people say at least 1,000 words. And the idea is, by having a blog post, number one, not everybody hears. So a blog post lets people read, but it also gives a chance for people to see what the show is about and let them decide, do I want to click play on this or subscribe or things like that. So,
okay, hold on. You just passed over what's super important. Okay, Google needs 300 or at least 1,000. What does that mean? So
words,
but what kind of words? What
good words.
So if I take my transcript and just jam it in there, that's a lot of work. But Dave, it's a lot of words. Why does that not work?
Yeah, because Google, what is Google's job? Let's reverse engineer this. How did Google beat Netscape? they delivered great results. Like, you don't have to, usually you find what you're looking for on the front page of Google and you're like, this is exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Whereas when somebody goes to your website, when I go to a website and I see an unedited transcript, I run immediately because I always say we don't talk like we write. We don't write like we talk. And I realized that, hey, it's easy. It's only, $7 a month for Otter, but it's not good content. It's just content. You've basically just threw a bunch of crap on the wall. Now, granted, it's words and it's a conversation, but again, we don't write like we talk and we don't talk like we write. And that might actually hurt what's called your bounce rate, which is a weird thing because there are times when somebody will go to your website and find exactly what they were looking for, and then leave. Well, that's a bounce. That means somebody came, they looked at one page and left. But in some cases, having bad content on your website will have people go there and then leave. And Google pays attention to that because Google's job is to send you to good content. And so that's where I put a thing in Facebook this morning. I said, it appears to me, because somebody said, hey, I've been doing transcripts for a few months now, and I'm not seeing a huge amount of boost. And I said, it appears to me that transcripts are yet another silver bullet that doesn't work.
Yeah. Okay. But let's be really, really clear. There are some cases, my case at Gallup, I have to have transcripts. Like people expect them. It's ADA compliancy. It's one of these kinds of things. Yeah. So we have to provide, I do edit them. What Google also checks for is page load speed. If you have a site that's super slow, say you're on a shared host and it's not a very good shared host and your pages take a long time to load, you will get penalized from Google for that. They want the user experience to be click on that link and it takes you right to the page and the page appears. The more pages, the faster the page, the better it gets ranked. So check your page load speed. Transcripts have a chance or have a tendency to slow that down because there's just so many words. It's bringing these in. There's some tricks and things you can do to fool that, but you do want to make sure that you have very, very quick page load speeds as well, and that your site is up to date on that. Okay, so 3 to 1,000 words. So, but what if all those are all links? Like, what if I have 1,000 words and they're all in links?
Yeah. Again, that might attract people, but will they stay? No, because they show up and they go, I don't know what all these links are about, because you have to listen to the podcast to understand what the links are for. And so that's what gets kind of tricky. I would say, and it's kind of like porn, right? You know a good blog post when you see it. No. But there was that whole legal defense, and they said, look, we can't define what porn is, but we know what it is when I see it. Yeah. And to me, a good blog post, number one, a good blog post is not somebody going on a page. You've got subheadings. People don't read. Let's get that right out in the open first. People don't read. Trust me, as someone who works in tech support, people don't read. I can give people the exact steps and they'll come back and like, that's, I'm like, okay, you didn't read the answer. So usually a well-crafted blog post will have subheadings. So it's like, here is the top 3 things to know when you start a podcast. And then we'll have each subheading will be one of those things. And then you'll have a paragraph. And what happens then is somebody comes in, they see the title of your blog post. I cannot stress that enough. The title is always hugely important. They come to your website, they then read the subheadings, and then they'll read probably the first paragraph, maybe a little bit, they'll skim it. And if that first paragraph or the first thing they read sucks them in, they'll go ahead and read the rest of it or hit play. So it's not tricky. Yeah, I mean, it's not easy.
Just right. Like, Google will also penalize you if it's just links. Link, then they'll sense that's a spam, kind of a spammy site. You just got to write.
That's it.
Old fashioned.
And write for a person, not a robot. So don't sit there and go, today on Ask the Podcast Coach, we talked about how to start a podcast, because when you're trying to learn how to start a podcast, it can be hard and confusing when you're trying to learn how to start a podcast. And Ken Blanchard asked us about the top 3 things about how to start a podcast. And you just keep putting the phrase. It's like, look, a human's going to go, oh, I see what you're doing here, Mr. Spammer. And then you're at least for me, maybe that's just my opinion, but when I see somebody who is openly spamming a phrase, I go, I don't trust you anymore, because you're trying to, Jim had that. I wish this wasn't the end of the show, because that would be the title. Just write for a person. That's it. Yeah. And make it good. So
good stuff.
But
good
it's
stuff.
Crazy. But
man, that hour went fast.
Very, very fast. So Jim, what is coming up on the old Average Guy, or Home Gadget Geeks, found at theaverageguy.tv?
Yeah, you don't have to say all that stuff. So Dan Lefebvre, who sponsors the mug here on Ask the Podcast Coach, joins us. We spent a little time talking about his podcast, but some pretty good tech nerdery that's going on there. And so, Dan, thanks for coming on. We'll post it a little bit later this afternoon out at homegadgetgeeks.com. There we go.
And on Ask the Podcast, that's this show.
Yeah.
On the School of Podcasting, I'm going to be talking about lessons that podcasters can learn from the Squid Game on Netflix. The Squid Game right now is, for at least for a week, was the top program in the world. It was 89.3% more popular than an average show. And there's a lot of really great stories about it. If you haven't watched it, it's on Netflix. It's weird. It's definitely inspired by some other shows. So it's not entirely unique, but they added a creepy factor. And my favorite thing is when you watch it, they suck you in on the first episode, and on the second episode, they give you the backstory. And I was like, see, there's that whole, like, do I need to know the backstory first? No, I just know I got some creepy giant doll playing red light, green light. And I'm like, what is this? So it's very crazy. So I'll be talking about that on the School of Podcasting. I want to thank Mark over at podcastbranding.co. Of course, go over to why can I never remember Dan's website?
Based on a true story podcast.com.
Thank you. And James over at dogpodcastnetwork.com. Thanks to the chat room. Thanks to the awesome supporters, and stick around for some post show. Here's the thing with Dan. I know I always, in my brain, I go based on a true story, and my brain goes, don't forget podcast. It's based on a true story podcast. And for some reason, my brain goes, don't forget podcast. And my brain goes, wait, what was the first part again?
Exactly. Did I say that right? Did I get it done?
It's like, I mean, every time. So that's always fun.
Dave, I got some pretty harsh feedback from last week's show. I deserved it, by the way, but why don't you take a second and read that the feedback that we got. How'd this come in? Did somebody email
via email? Yeah.
Okay.
And I just now have to find something I can read. Okay, here we go. This was from Leslie, and she said, your general conclusion seems, this is okay. Let's see what we're talking about. I was
pointed
talking
at me, by the way.
Yeah. And we were talking about how now that Anchor has this deal where they're going to open up a marketplace for people to do more ads in Anchor, and people are taking really popular shows and stealing the RSS feed and putting it into Anchor. And then, the listener may not know that they're not listening to the official show.
Hijacked feeds.
Yeah. Great.
About. Yeah.
So,
my comment was like, well, go ahead.
Well, yeah, your comment was kind of like, like if you're not a giant show, somebody's probably not going to hijack.
You should be grateful. You should be grateful someone's stealing your feed. It's basically what it came down to.
So she says, Leslie is one of those words. It could be either way.
Yeah.
Your general conclusion seems to be that unless you're a big shelter and making a lot of money off your show, it's not that big of a deal, and that they are promoting your show. You'll never be a big shell getting big advertising dollars if you can't prove that people are listening to your show. And if they're listening to a hijacked version of your show or another RSS feed, you've got listeners that you can't prove you have. You're actually, am I reading that right? You've actually disapproved in your own conclusions.
Disprove.
Disapprove.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. If it's a Harvey podcast, who cares? But if it's something that somebody has goals and aspirations for larger than just a Harvey podcast, that's a real problem. and it really needs to be addressed in some way. And unfortunately, it seems that companies like Anchor have no interest in the well-being of their podcast clients. Couldn't have said that one better, because they don't view them as customers. They view the people that they are themselves selling advertising to as their customers. So
yeah, she called me out. She's actually right. Like it is. I was probably a little too flippant with that. I was kind of like, dude, unless you're a big fish, they're advertising for you. I absolutely said that, and I still kind of believe that. But she is right. If this is a passion project and your heart and soul is in this thing, and you've got some goals, and you've got some advertising goals, she's right in the sense that if you're not tracking it everywhere, if someone is hijacking it, say they hijack it and they monetize it and get more downloads, you don't have any control of those downloads, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, that is, in this case, that's totally true. And Leslie, you are totally right. It's probably a little too flippant. That's kind of some of the danger that you run into. I was a little calorie high at the moment last week. So I'll retract on that a little bit and say, yeah, okay. If it's important, this is really the important part. If it's important to you, it is important. And so we should be more vigilant, and hosts should help us. It's not totally their responsibility in a lot of ways. It is some. Hosts should help us and not allowing that to happen. So I think that's what I would add in there, Dave. I sometimes I get a little tired of someone stole my show, and I wish someone would steal my show. kind of thing. So
what it is, I mean, even earlier we're talking with Shannon about Spotify, and if there are two versions, even if it's the same feed,
right.
If you have two shows using the same feed, so you're kind of like, it doesn't matter. They're both going to get the content. And this is where, again, don't get hung up on rankings in different apps, because usually it doesn't mean anything. But if the rankings are based on how many listens / downloads you get, and you actually have 200 downloads on version one of your show and 200 downloads on the other, and that puts you at 33, whereas if you had one show with 400 downloads, now you're up to like 27 or something like that. So that would be the other thing. But go ahead.
Yeah, if you're trying to do CPM, or you're trying to justify CPM to a not a supporter, but someone who's going to pay for it. I don't know why that word's not coming to me.
Sponsor?
Sponsor, thank you. Yeah, okay, that it matters then. But I think my point was do your show in a way, I think, if that's going to happen, do your show in a way that it benefits you if it does get ripped off. So make sure you're getting all the value in your show, that your branding and your location. I mean, certainly you can't miss opportunities to drive people back to your to your own website. I guess the difference in that would be if they're actually downloading it and changing it and then re-uploading it into a feed, maybe that's different. So it's a complicated, I guess it's a really, really, so Leslie, you're right. And I was wrong in this case. It's a complicated issue. And there should be ways about going about getting this corrected if that's happening.
There you go. I found this post and I was like, we got to talk about this. This is from, what the heck? Oh, there we go. This is from David Hooper, who is a friend of the show and author of the book. He said, pulling it out of the bookcase, Big Podcast, which you can find at bigpodcast.com. Good guy, based out of Nashville, known him for years. He's the guy I got on the radio with. He had a radio show in Nashville and said, hey, you want to come down to Nashville and talk about podcasting? And I said, I will be there. But he made a list. I'm going to see how many of these we can get. What would you consider a guest red flag?
What do you mean?
Like somebody says, hey, can I come on your show? And you start to talk to them and they say something and you're like, this might not.
Well, certainly it's, and this is sometimes a good time to get a guest, but a new book or something new for them to advertise, or, sometimes like I'm suspicious of anybody who contacts me to be
Right.
on the show. That's a red flag to begin with. Like, why do you want to be? And it shouldn't. Listen, that shouldn't be the reason why I do that. But I don't know what else.
Well, that would be one. I always look like my favorite is, again, when people say, "Hey, I'd like to be a guest on Ask the Podcast Coach." Right there, I go, "Okay, there's somebody that doesn't listen to my show." So that's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
But he had things like, if they say things like, "Oh, I don't need to wear headphones," like that's a red flag. I've done it this way on other podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
That's like, here are the questions I want you to ask me.
Mm-hmm.
That's a red flag.
By the way, red flag does not equal they don't make it on, right? It's just
right.
These are warning flags.
Warning signs.
I
Yes.
should ask some questions, right?
Yeah. When you we've all had relationships, right, that have gone sour, and you go back like, oh, that was a red flag.
Exactly.
When my family said, don't marry that girl, that was a red flag. I don't need to do an equipment check. That might be a red flag. I can just use my ear pods. Okay. Please send the questions over. That's kind of, before it was like, here's what I want you to ask me.
Yeah.
Here's now I want to see what you're going to ask me. I want to review the episode before publishing it. That to me is a giant red flag that, hey, guess what? This person's going to be a pain in the butt.
Well, depends on the guest. I think.
Yeah.
I mean, that's more of a yellow flag for me of like, because listen, I've said that because I have to for work. Like,
yeah, I'm going to say, I think it's going to depend on who the guest is.
Right.
Yeah. Because they've got to cover their butt, and they want to make sure you're not making them say things that they didn't say.
Yeah.
And then last but not least, can't the editor handle that?
Mm.
So I don't know if anybody else has any other, but I saw that and I was like, total Dave Hooper, good stuff. And I'm trying to think if I've ever, I had one, mine was, well, I'm not turning off my air conditioning. And I was like, oh, okay. Cause she was in it was for my weight loss show, which I normally don't have guests, but she, I kind of vetted her and was like, okay, cool. And she had some great insight, but she was in an RV in the middle of Arizona. And it was like 100 bazillion degrees outside. And she's like, oh, I can't turn off my air conditioning. I'll die in here. And which I should have just said, why don't we reschedule to a time when, we can get you in a quieter place. So what I did is I said, well, let's just, if you can, just be quiet for 10 seconds. And I'm going to record a bunch of your background noise. And then that'll make it easier to filter it out. And it did, but it just made it sound like she was in a tin can. So that was one that I was like, I should have just said, yeah. So, but if you want to see the chat room, I didn't copy the link, but I think that was in, that might be, just find Dave, go to bigpodcast.com. But that was one that's why I wanted to bring it up here. Cause I was like, man, that's just some great stuff.
Hey, it looked like Shannon's got another question. Can we pop her back in and see what she?
So Shannon, we're bringing you up on stage. So
thank you.
Yes. All right.
Okay. So the way that I've gotten a couple, the last 3 interviews that I did were with really high up people like in the industry. And I went to them. I was like, you don't have to call in. I don't want, I'll just come to you and we'll just sit down wherever you are, whatever is easy for you. It's people that are, we're a kind of a ranchy group. We sit down, we talk, not a lot of finesse all the time. Right. And so I've got the mic set up as good as I can. I'm still learning, but you've got guys that will sit back and then talk quiet. And so I'm always fiddling, with the mic, and then they'll lean forward and get really excited. And then it's peeking all over the place. And like, is there anything like, as far as tips of whether it's equipment or editing, or, hey, this is just kind of how it works and nothing's perfect and it's okay?
No, I would say, and they're going to say, I can't fit them over my hat, maybe in your case, but they need to wear headphones. Because I right now I hear myself, and there's a big difference when I get this close to the microphone. And likewise, if I get comfy and I'm back here, I can't hear myself. So that's a way that they'll kind of hopefully know. And then I think just because I've been through this, I recorded a panel it was the worst ever. I got to go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and record NPR. It was an actual NPR show. And they were in a conference room that had a ceiling that was, I don't know, 40 feet tall with a glass ceiling, literally a glass ceiling. And all these guys in suits. And I just kept going. I would just point at them, and I had a microphone sitting there by me, like, hey, come to the mic. And so what happened was, I think it was the third question. So the host was like, so tell me, Dan, what do you think about such and such? And Dan was nowhere near the mic. And I just was like, and he started to answer, and he's like, well, I think that blah. And I just went, hold on a second. I go, Dan, we really need you to be close to the mic. And I said, so just start your answer again, but just, and I just said, hey, everybody, we want what you're saying is really important, and we want to capture it well. So if you could please just remember to stay close to the microphone, because otherwise it's going to sound weird. And, so-and-so is the host, and she's working hard on this. So I don't want to be a stickler, but if you could please stay close to the mic. And after that, I didn't have a single problem from anybody.
Do you run into people who are scared to death of a microphone?
Oh,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
That's like a real thing I'm finding.
Yeah.
Oh, my favorite was I did a podcast for a local event called Rockin' on the River, and people were hammered out of their mind. They're like, woo, Rockin' on the River, baby. And I'd be like, so tell me, what do you think about Rockin' on the River? And I would put a microphone in their face, and it was like the worst buzzkill ever, because they would sober up and run away. They were like, they'd be ready to get naked in public, but they're like, put a microphone in front of their face, and they're like, no, don't want to talk about it.
Shannon, what gear are you taking for these interviews?
Oh, she's got good gear.
How are you actually doing it?
So I've got I have two Shure SM7Bs, and then the mic stands. I do have a Rodecaster Pro, but I have gotten stuck in a couple spots where I need to use the podcast, or I've got a PodTrack, the P4. That one, yes. But how do you, as far as like the microphone or the headphones that I have are, I don't know what they are.
Big uns?
Yeah. And so they don't plug into that. So what do you do in those cases?
Get an adapter.
Yeah.
There's an adapter. Okay.
There is.
Yeah. Like I have one here, which is fun because now I can't hear myself. But this is what goes into the Rodecaster, and some of them do the opposite. They can go from big to small, but I'm sure there's one that's the opposite.
For sure.
You plug this in,
you can do that,
and it goes into a small thing. And
I'm gonna have to get a lot more organized.
I can't hear anything.
I'm gonna get a lot more organized. All these little pieces and wires and cords and adapters, and
get a fishing, or
box.
the tackle box.
Yeah. Or great idea.
Or you can go to go to Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever, and get a just get like a tool kit, that you'd put tools into. Either one of those would work out really, really well for you.
Oh, that's a great idea.
One of the suggestions I'd have for you, and I know you got some really good mics, but getting a headset instead of having them run through one of those nice, I've got one of those Audio Technica headsets that's got a mic that comes down.
Yep.
Having a headset where they can't move around, they don't have to come up to the mic. It gets them earbuds and everything all in one. It's they're $150 or something like that. So they're not too cheap, but they're XLR, and they would plug into the equipment that you already have, and you could just give that to them. They'll put it on, and then they can set it and forget it. You don't have to have any other
about
gear.
it. Yeah,
and you can still use your gear that you want. But I think for those kinds of guests, a lot easier than trying to set them up with a microphone.
Good thinking. That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I've found those helpful, and I like to have them. I did a show, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago from my shed because we had a house guest here. And so I went out to the shed. I use that headset and they sound great. So it's just an easy way. It is XLR. So you'll have to, it's not US. Some people try to do this USB. That's why I ask you what equipment you have, but you have all the right equipment for it. So
she's a member of the School of Podcasting. Of course she does.
BPH1, I think, is the Audio Technica BPH1, I think is the model that I like. Pretty easy to use. So Shannon, thanks for jumping back in again. And another question.
So
appreciate it. Have a great week.
You guys later.
All right. Have a great week.
Yeah. And Craig came up with a great red flag for a guest.
Oh yeah.
How many downloads do you have? That's a big red flag.
When they ask you that. Yeah.
That's when you know that they're coming on to promote something. And
what do you think about all these spammers that want to add things? They want to do a sponsored post, or they want to collaborate with you on a sponsored post for your site. What do you think of all those guys, Dave?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I
go back and forth.
Yeah.
I've
never had a sponsored post. Because I had one on my very first podcast, and it was a podcast for musicians, and they said they would tie it in to my content, and it was about a casino. And I went, I'm not sure how you tied that into music, besides the fact that, bands occasionally will play a casino, but I was like, yeah.
So Glenn says he takes them all and takes their money. Like it's $100 or whatever. I forget.
Right.
What he said. And boom, they're on there. He doesn't even give it a second thought.
Yeah. Jim, do you remember they're asking about your headset, and I'm running over to
Audio Technica. I think it's the Audio Technica BPH. I think that's right. BPH1. BPH.
BP. We're doing this is Jim. I was going to say something snarky. This is Jim and Dave doing their imitation of the new media show. I don't edit. Anyway, there's a link in the show notes. supportthishow.com/BPHS1.
S1. There we go.
We'll take you there. So,
hold on before we move off of that. One of the recommendations, if you're going to buy that, the can covers, what do they call those? The foam that it comes with is not thick enough. You can buy some replacements, and they're thicker, and it makes them more comfortable as you're wearing them. So the ones that you get that come with it go right up against your ears. And if you're going to do it for any length of time, that's not going to be very, very comfortable. Like I said, you can purchase some replacement ones that are a little bit thicker, and that'll make it a little more comfortable.
Yeah. Daniel J. Lewis from mypodcastreviews.com says, for a sponsored post, I charge a large upfront fee and then a monthly fee to keep the post online. So far, it's kept all the irrelevant sponsors posts away.
I've tried making them join Patreon that way. Like, nope, you got to be a Patreon subscriber if you want to do that. That usually shuts them off too.
I like that idea. Like, just be a $20 supporter. Because in theory, if you want me to talk about if you're trying to get exposure, you just got to pay me for it.
Yeah. Yeah, that almost always shuts them down. Like, I have it, and they're like, "Oh, I can't do Patreon. Whatever." So
I'm trying to find. Somebody asked a great question really early in the show, and so I forget who asked this. So my apologies for not giving you credit. But they said, "Oh, here it is. It was Chris Nessie. Would Dave and Jib want hundreds or a few thousand here live?"
What would you want, Dave? I know I already said what I want, but what?
I would, because the problem with I've been on live posts where you have, thousands of, even hundreds of people, and it's really hard. I mean, right now we have, 25, I think, in the chat room, and being able to read the chat room goes out the window when you have, I've seen them where it's just, and you're like, wait, I think somebody said something about a giraffe. What was that? I missed it, and
unmanageable. It's unmanageable. You just can't. It takes a lot of work to follow a chat room that's that busy.
Yeah. When we do a Libsyn one, and I think we use Crowdcast or something like that, we have somebody usually from our marketing department that is, and Crowdcast has a special question feature. And so they always make sure to tell people, if you have a question, use the question feature, because it kind of gets it out of the almost like a river. Right. It gets it out of the river of text that's going by and sets it aside. And so they usually have people there manning the chat, because it's not totally insane, but it's pretty insane. It's when you all of a sudden you say something that strikes a chord with people, the chat room just explodes, and you're like, I can't do anything with that. It's just, you're like,
we do Call to Coach at Gallup does about 30 or 35 or 40 live, and it's a core audience. They know how to interact. They know how to use the chat room. They actually add a lot of value to the show. Their questions are great. We haven't put a queue in the chat room, so I know a question's coming in. They're trained, right? But we've started doing the one of the gals on our social media team has me doing these LinkedIn lives, and there's these 30 minutes, and we're doing hundreds, and it's and it's all built for interaction. It's a little bit built like Twitch, where it's like the goal is to get the chat room all fired up, right?
Right.
And I had a core listener who comes to the 35 or 40 and say, I'm still trying to figure out what just happened. Like I went to this LinkedIn live. I have PTSD. It was so much to deal with. And so you just got to kind of figure out, I think, who's the audience? Who are you trying to get? Where's it trying to go to? Some of those kinds of things. Listen, there were folks who joined us on that LinkedIn live who are like, this is the greatest thing ever. Why are you not doing more of these? This was fun. For the listeners who are actually trying to get something out of it or are used to a different environment, a little bit of a struggle for them.
Well, and if we got into that situation, that's where, if you have a question, ask the podcastcoach.com/join.
Yeah.
Because the chat room would be, I don't want to say worthless, but it'd be
unmanageable.
Unmanageable.
Yeah.
Craig says with hundreds, it becomes a webinar and you need someone who's only monitoring the chat. Yeah. And Jason Bryant, back home from whatever stand he was at, he's always in these bizarre countries. I was watching a live stream last night and super chats kept interrupting the flow. That's a tough one because super chats are cool. You're giving people a way to support your show. But if in the middle, you're like, yeah, we were watching this movie and it was great. Oh, hey, thanks to, Kitty 97 for the super chat. All right. And what happened next was, you're not going to believe this. Oh, hey, Steve, thanks for the $4.27. I get it. It's like, yeah, I get it. So that's a tough one. How do you not say thanks to people who are supporting you without it complete? That's where you almost
have
need
super chat moments though. Every 5 minutes you take a break to stop interrupting it in the middle.
Yeah.
Like you can thank them when they come in. They're gonna get recognized, but do it at the end of a thought, not right in the middle of it.
Yeah, and that takes practice. Going back to the early days of Ask the Podcast Coach, and I still do this more than I probably should, but there are times when I will see something in the chat and just tangent immediately. And it's like,
you're a million times better than you used to be on that. You used to just like squirrel and you were out. But now you're really good at seeing it. I can kind of I see when you see something. Like I'll see the chat and I'll see you see it and I'll know, okay, Dave saw it. This is probably where we're going.
Yeah.
Right.
I do wish that I should send this into them as a suggestion. I wish there was some way I could make you be able to put things on the screen.
Yeah, I could if I just logged in as you.
Oh,
I could do it that way.
That's true.
I could use I could use your email address and then it'll send you an email with that one-time code, and then I would put it in, and then we would both be hosts at that point. But you're right. I wish there was a way somebody coming in, you could just flag me as a co-host and it would give me like in Zoom. Zoom does this. And I could say, okay, I want to give him host capabilities. That'd be a lot better.
And I know a while ago, somebody mentioned how I could somehow do something like that for you. If I like in YouTube, if I made you an administrator or something like that.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I'd have the ability in YouTube to put links for you.
Got it.
If you made me an admin.
Yeah. But this was that to me, I think that would just be great.
Which I am, by the way. You have, and I am.
Yeah.
I can't put links in there.
But that's one of those things where it would be cool if you could say, oh, hey, here's a quick question or whatever. And that way you can kind of help steer as well and that whole 9 yards. But, I love StreamYard. I'm not complaining. It's just
it's super great. If you ever want to be disillusioned by it, though, follow their Facebook group. Like, man, the whining that goes on.
Oh, really?
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Just can we make this bigger? This doesn't work. My hardware doesn't work with the green screen, blah, 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 blah. And again, that's probably being insensitive to people who have really big problems. But, you're like, oh, if you ever just want to ruin your feeling about anything, find a Facebook group or watch them on YouTube. Jeez.
Yeah. Andrew's saying, nice mic, Dave. The MV7 is pretty incredible. For this show, I number one, it's a little plosive hungry, so I have to be really careful with it. It has more what the heck is the name of that? Where you get close to it, proximity effect
Mhm.
than my RE320. So I
It's
I
good.
wanted to test it. Yeah, it's a good
good.
mic. I like
Good
it,
mic. Yeah.
but I'm there's a reason why I use the RE320. So
I'd be interested in hearing a higher pitched voice on it, just to see what it sounds like when the frequency goes up a little bit, either younger or just a
yeah,
higher pitched voice,
yeah,
or even mine where it's a little bit. My voice is even a little bit more deeper than yours, and
yeah,
how that would handle how it would handle that.
yeah. Records and Band says, isn't that what Facebook is? It's just whining. It's recreational outrage, man.
I was in a Discord group for a crypto thing that I do, and they created a channel that's just whining. And
Nice.
well, I mean, people are going to do it. The fun thing was there's people whining, so that became a channel about people whining about people
People
whining.
whining. Nice.
That's so good, so good. Well, hopefully it's a little calmer today than it was last week.
That's it.
Yeah.
And I have to go get a haircut. So
You should.
yeah, I'm not. I don't quite have the Jerry Garcia thing going, but
It's coming back. It was coming back. How
Yeah.
long in between cuts?
It's been a while. And that's the other thing that I'm kind of happy now that when my face, well, and my face too, when my hair gets longer, it doesn't, like when I was in high school, it got wide. It was weird looking. Now it's like, it doesn't look great, but it doesn't, I can kind of pull it off, but it's a pain in the butt. Kudos to females who have hair down to their like, I'm going through shampoo like it's nothing. And I was just like, and it takes longer to dry.
My middle son has super long hair. So
yeah, and it's just like,
he can mane it though. He can
yeah,
if it's been a couple days and it's just got a little bit of oil in it,
yeah.
he can kind of flip it and it just creates this mane on him. It's pretty great.
Nice.
Pretty great. Well, have a great weekend.
So if you see that the Ask the Podcast Coach show is not out, usually it goes out about 4 or 5 by the time I'm done with it. It's going to be longer today because I gotta go and get my wig busted. So.
And one more PSA, if you haven't, Red Cross is desperate for donors right now. So if you got the ability to give blood here, anywhere around the world, but here in the United States, if you're desperate for that, do it, because now is the time. They are in critical levels at this point. So that's a little PSA for Red Cross. Yeah,
absolutely.
All right.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.
Take care.
Take care.